Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. Welcome to the How to Win in India webinar. My name is Supriya Pandey, and I am a senior consultant at Amritt. Before we begin the presentation, I just wanted to go over a few logistical details. If you're logged in, you should see before you the first slide of the presentation. Please do not minimize the screen and confirm that you can see the entire screen on your monitor. You will also see a webinar app, which will allow you to send us questions throughout the session. The speaker will answer the questions either through the course of the session or at the very end. During the course of the webinar, we will also be conducting polls and would really appreciate your participation. If there are any questions that you have after the webinar, please feel free to email us at webinar@amritt.com. On behalf of Amritt, we are also thankful to the World Trade Centers, many of which have helped us publicize this webinar. And we are very much appreciative of the US Department of Commerce, Foreign and Commercialized Service for collaborating with us in this webinar. I would now like to go ahead and introduce the featured speakers. Gregory Taevs joins us from India. It is 10:30 p.m. there, and we are very grateful to Gregory for joining in today. As Acting Deputy Senior Commercial Officer at the US Embassy in New Delhi, Gregory Taevs heads up the day-to-day operations of the 7 offices comprising the second largest commercial service country footprint in the world. Before arriving in India, he served with distinction in postings in Mexico City, Istanbul, Lisbon, Seoul, and twice in Tokyo. Mr. Taevs received a master's degree in business administration from California State University, a certificate in international business from the American Graduate School of International Management, Thunderbird, and a Bachelor of Science degree in business from California State University. Our second speaker is Gunjan Bagla. Gunjan Bagla is the Managing Director of Amritt Inc., based in Malibu, California. Amritt has a subsidiary based in India. Gunjan founded Amritt 15 years ago to help Western organizations succeed in India. Amritt's clients include large and small companies and organizations which include Bose Corporation, Cisco, Clorox, Danfoss, DigiKey, Disney, Flex, Paramount Farms, Philips, Raytheon, Roche, Woodward Industries, and many more. Many of you may have seen Gunjan's articles about India for the Harvard Business Review or found his 5-star rated book on Amazon, Doing Business in 21st Century India, published by Hachette, in hardback, paperback, audiobook, and Kindle formats. He often speaks at conferences and events worldwide on the subject of business with India. Gunjan earned an MBA with honors from Southern Illinois University and a degree in mechanical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, India, which was established by Caltech and MIT. Without further ado, I hand over to our presenters today. Thank you.
Thanks, Supriya. This is Greg Taevs, the Deputy Senior Commercial Officer in New Delhi. Hello, everyone from New Delhi. It gives me great pleasure tonight to sort of introduce India as a market to everyone. We at the American Embassy here think that it's a very exciting market, and it's exciting for different reasons. First of all, I mean, there's the tremendous growth the market has experienced and is projected to experience in the future, between 6 and maybe 10% in every year from now on. And this is something that American companies really should not ignore. The population is enormous here. As you can imagine, it's roughly a third of the size of the United States with 3 times the population. So 1.3 billion people in an area about the third of the United States. Now, the thing that makes it exciting is, this is a young population. About a third of that population is under the age of 18, if you can imagine that. It's a population that is experiencing growing purchasing power. So these are people that are buying their first smartphone, their first automobile, their first television, and they desire a lot of things that that are out there. And so it's an exciting situation. Now, the Commercial Service is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Not only do we have a network of offices in the United States, but in 100 countries around the world. In India, we have 7 offices around India to help American companies crack the market here. Now, we look at India very much as a market for American companies, and typically our sweet spot is the small and medium-sized company. So we have services and research to provide that type of company to get them started in India. We have several priorities that we are looking at, and I can just tell you briefly about them. We're looking at the aerospace and defense industry. At $16 billion, this is a market that is growing very fast. There is a predisposition for American products, and civil aviation is a market that's growing 20% per year, double-digit growth for the past 4 years in India. India ranks 5th in global military spending. Healthcare, any kind of healthcare, basically, from all the way from nutraceuticals all the way up to MRI machines. India is big in generic medicines. However, they lack the capabilities for sophisticated healthcare equipment. So basically, anything in a hospital is imported, and a lot of that is from the United States. And so healthcare companies have a natural market here. Energy. So the government of India has a Power for All initiative. So it's another area that's growing like crazy in India. It calls for $225 billion spending to modernize India's power generation and distribution transmission systems over the next years, and diversifying the energy mix, everything in the energy mix. So everything from solar to hydro to oil and gas. You'll find a growing market here. Environmental technologies. Environmental technologies, India needs everything in this regard, and American companies have an edge in this. So, the Envirotech market, $17.9 billion and growing at 16% per year. India has air pollution that's quite famous, and only 40% of Indians have access to sanitary water systems. Government projects focus on smart cities and clean rivers. It's creating a lot of opportunities. I'll just mention also tourism from India to the United States. We consider that an export, actually, but it's huge. Indian travelers to the United States represent a huge market, and they spend a lot of money in the States. It's great for the American economy. 1.3 million Indian visitors spent over $15 billion in 2017. Higher education, also, I'll mention, we also consider that an export. So Indian students studying in the United States, it's a huge market. Over 194,000 Indian students attended higher education in the United States in 2017. Let me just mention a few challenges. I think that could be on everybody's mind. There's certainly bureaucracy here. Corruption is always mentioned. There are price controls sometimes. IP protections is kind of tricky. There's an issue when you go into the court system. It's quite lengthy. So these are some watch-outs. There have been some reforms recently. There are big reforms in the tax system. The goods and services tax made it awfully a lot easier to do business here. The insolvency and bankruptcy code was a giant step forward. So there have been some reforms. Now, what we tell companies coming into the market is this is your success mantra. You need the 4 Ps, which is price, partners, patience, and presence. So each one of those you can kind of think about. You could focus on the long-term potential and regional strategies, of course. It's a big country with a lot of differences. We'll talk about that later, I think. And customizing your product or service for the market. Sometimes when they can't afford a product made for the American market, sometimes a company can modify it and make an Indian version of that same product without bells and whistles. And sometimes that goes better here. So that's just a few watch outs. And of course, some companies have already cracked the market. And there are some companies that have been here a while. They know how to do business here. And I think we're going to talk about a couple of those success stories right now. Gunjan?
Hey, thank you, Greg. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, and thanks for all the hard work that you and your colleagues are doing across India. We at Amritt work very closely with the U.S. Commercial Service, and we see them really as friends rather than competitors in any way. So I want to start with a couple of examples of companies that have done well in India. These are both companies that have subsidiaries that are traded on the Bombay Stock Exchange. Cummins has a very substantial presence. You see that picture is from the Cummins factory in Pune, about 100 miles from New Delhi. And it's they have a high number of women working at the factory.
From Mumbai, Gunjan. You said from Delhi, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, sorry, 100 miles from Mumbai. Thank you. Cummins currently employs 10,000 people or more in India, and their annual sales last year reached almost $2 billion. They've been in India for a number of years. They have factories across the country. Let's take another example of Whirlpool, a company based out of Michigan. They entered India a while ago, and they face immense competition in India. There are Chinese companies such as Haier. There is Samsung and LG from Korea. There are some European companies making refrigerators and washers and so on. And there's a substantial number of companies from India as well that have product that competes directly with Whirlpool. But Whirlpool is doing very well in India. Last year, their sales grew at over 14%. Now imagine that, an American company with Chinese and Indian and Korean competition, and their sales are growing fairly rapidly. We're going to show you a little commercial that Whirlpool ran in India. Whirlpool runs a vibrant business in India for India, and the new India today is changing. So this commercial actually focuses on a modern couple where apparently the husband may be a better cook than his wife, and she's trying to whip up a pie of some sort while he is out on the road somewhere, and they're talking through an iPad. So give me a moment to start this commercial, this little commercial here.
Now add some whipped cream.
Essay?
Yeah, and it's done.
And done. Huh?
Yeah.
No, yaar, this is not like the cake you make.
Of course, Gib.
Can you thoda help?
Helping na, baby. Whirlpool, Whirlpool. Open the fridge, lose the tarboos, and enjoy the views. Fresh, na?
IntelliFresh. My Whirlpool IntelliFresh has an AI microprocessor, 3 IntelliSensors, and SealFresh technology that keep things fresher for longer.
So, who is the best?
Of course, baby. Whirlpool, Whirlpool.
Thanks, Gunjan. So I just wanted to sort of point out to everyone, hope you enjoyed the video, that this is definitely showing a new India. Growing up in India, I cannot remember any ad that would have sort of moved away from the image of a traditional housewife and sort of shown a man knowing more in the kitchen than the wife. So anyway, just to pointed that out. Back to Gunjan.
Yeah, thank you, Supriya. So, a few years ago, I was on the campus of Facebook in Menlo Park. This was when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was visiting California, and Mark Zuckerberg held a town hall kind of discussion with the Prime Minister. So, one of the things that Mark shared, I think, is an important story for all of us to keep in mind. There was a point in Facebook's evolution where the company wasn't doing very well, where the investors and the founders were fighting with one another, and Zuckerberg and was quite stressed, and so he turned to Steve Jobs, whom he knew, for some advice and guidance. Some of you may know that Steve Jobs had spent a year in India somewhat earlier in his career, and Jobs gave Zuckerberg some advice about running the business, but then he said, "Hey, I think you need to take a break from this intensity of what you've been doing here at Facebook. And I think, Mark, you need to go spend a month in India and unplug from all of the things that you've been doing here in Menlo Park." And Mark actually took that advice, went to India, and absorbed himself into something very different. You might also know that shortly after Zuckerberg came back from India, Facebook spent $18 billion on buying a company that most Americans had never heard of, a company that we all now know as WhatsApp, a company that had zero revenue at that point, but Facebook felt that this was going to be an important addition to their offering of services. And they have, of course, continued to improve what WhatsApp has to offer. And so the point I'm trying to make here is it's not just about the numbers, about the GDP and the growth of the market. All those are important. But you really, to succeed in India, you need to get into the way that India and Indians think. And today for my webinar, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about things that run across many different industries. We'll take industry-specific questions towards the end, but I want to really focus on the broad issues that apply to many different companies. So I want you to keep these three images in mind as I talk through, and maybe if we have time at the end, we will get through to these images. On the left is a sign, uh, pointing perhaps a parking spot for a driverless car. Wonder why that's happening in India. On the top right is a picture that I took in the city of Mysore in the state of Karnataka, about 80 miles from Bangalore. I saw this sign for the Palmyra, and the bottom is cut off a little bit, but it says resorts and accommodations. So give some thought as to why there would be tenements in a place that offers luxury resorts and accommodation. Now, why would you see that in India? Give that some thought. Finally, at the bottom is one of my favorite photographs that I show periodically. Here's a photograph from Chennai in South India. There's a tree right in the middle of the road, a huge tree, in fact. What might be going on there. So give that some thought, and we'll come back to this perhaps towards the end. One thing you need to remember, most companies that are considering in India today have been in China or have considered China. And often American companies thinking about India will say, let's apply what we learned in this other large Asian country. Let's apply what worked in Beijing to Bombay. Let's apply what worked in Shanghai, to India. The only thing common between China and India is that they are two large countries in the continent of Asia. But when you go to India, you can use Google freely. Twitter and Facebook are available to all Indian citizens and to all visitors. In fact, Facebook's second largest population is from India, soon to be the largest number of users in a couple of years. So Facebook, Twitter, Google are all developing specific applications, specific features in India, and sometimes bringing them to the rest of the world. So there's a lot of good stuff happening that you don't kind of see in China. The other big difference is that India has a vibrant and free press. and much of this is Indian. So the Times of India is published from a dozen different locations, printed in a dozen different locations across India. My brother is a prominent journalist at New Delhi Television or NDTV, and they speak with an independent voice out of New Delhi, but offering coverage all across the country. Just in the last couple of weeks, there's been some controversial and investigative journalistic articles from the Hindu, a newspaper published from southern India. And from my hometown in Kanpur, where I was born and I grew up, is the headquarters of the largest newspaper in the world. The Dainik Jagran translates into Daily Awakening, and this is a Hindi language newspaper which is published across all of northern India. There's plenty of Western media available as well, so most Indians can watch CNN or read the New York Times or go to the BBC website and read what the Wall Street Journal is saying. There's no limitation on that. India is also home to the oldest stock market in Asia. The Bombay Stock Exchange was set up in the 1800s, so well before any other country in China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all of the other markets you might think of. And it is an open enough market that many American companies have their stocks also traded for their Indian subsidiaries on the Bombay Stock Exchange or the National Stock Exchange. The other more timely thing about India this week is that the world's largest democracy is going to have 900 million people getting ready to cast their vote in an all-electronic election that begins on Thursday. It actually runs over a 5 or 6 week period, so the final results won't be available in somewhere until the middle of May. But it's quite a spectacle, and if you Google Indian elections, you can read a lot of things about what's happening. So let me now see if I can try and run one of the polls. Supriya, do you think you can try to launch the poll?
Sure, but
yeah, it's not showing up on my screen.
Okay. Okay, the poll is up. Just take a minute to please answer.
So what we really want to know is which countries are you considering at this point for expansion, and the answers will be anonymous. So your names or your companies will not be displayed.
Again, I also want to take an opportunity to remind everyone that you can send us any questions you might have using the question box in your webinar app. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and share the results.
All right, Supriya, do you want to read the results?
Sure. We have 24% for China, 53 India, 15% other parts of Asia, Latin America 6%, and other 3.
Oh, so that's interesting that other parts of Asia figure pretty heavily, and I think that's because we see a lot of conversation about Vietnam and Thailand and the so-called ASEAN countries, and perhaps Taiwan as well. So it looks like we have a good range of interest in India plus other countries as well. What I'm going to do at this point, can you close this poll, Supriya, and start our second poll at this time?
Okay. Okay, it's up, everyone. Please go ahead and cast your vote. Again, just a reminder that your responses are completely anonymous. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the voting in the interest of time and share the results. So the answers, Gunjan, are question was, what do you expect might be your biggest challenge in working with India? Dealing with rules and regulations, 50%. Finding the right channel partner, distributor, 38%. Understanding how Indians think and act, 12%. And I guess no one has said that they will not face a challenge.
Okay, so rules and regulations seem to be number one, and then channel partners number two. And this is pretty much what we see in the incoming inquiries and questions that we get from prospective and new clients. The objective of this webinar is to take you into territory that you might not otherwise have gone, and to perhaps make you slightly uncomfortable on purpose. So we are going to do that, and this poll, I think, is quite revealing to all of us. So keep that thought in mind as we proceed. Let's switch back to the...
Yeah, it's switched, Gunjan.
Okay. So my advice to Western companies entering India is very important to not treat India as a monolith. Sitting in New York or Chicago or St. Louis, Missouri, and we have registrants from 13 different states today, it's easy to think of a point rather than, a subcontinent. Well, India has a population larger than all of Europe, and 23 official languages, and a very, very diverse population. So people in Punjab and Kashmir are very different from people in Gujarat and people in southern India and eastern India and so on. And you need to understand and appreciate that diversity. So one example of that is the Indian currency notes. I have a picture of a 500 rupee note here, and at the bottom of that picture is an expansion of the box there, and that's basically the message there says 500 rupees in 13 different scripts. And some of those scripts are such that even though I was born in India and I grew up there, I can't even read the letters, much less the words. Okay. So India is more complex than all of Europe. You wouldn't sell to Norway the same way that you would sell to Greece, or to England or Great Britain the same way that you would sell to Croatia. Well, you have to keep that in mind when you think about India as well. And so one of the most common mistakes for new entrants coming to India, and we see this in our incoming inquiries, is, I'd say 40% of our inquiries could be summarized in these three words, help us to select a distributor. Okay, those three words are key. Select. And select assumes, hey, I've got all these inquiries from my website, or I met these people at the Dubai trade show, or this event in Chicago, or in Hong Kong, or wherever. And so I've got this set of very interesting people who have great websites and a wonderful plan to sell my products, and help me, Amrit, to figure out which of these companies is my best partner. Okay, and that's a challenge. Okay, that's a problem. The second assumption here is, when you say select a distributor, you assume very often that a single partner, a single distributor, is going to be sufficient to cover the entire depth, breadth, and width of India. All the way from Norway to Sicily, all the way from France to Croatia. Okay, ain't gonna happen when you're thinking of a country like India in most cases. Okay, and finally, the word distributor assumes that the best possibility for selling into India is where someone buys your product and then resells it. Now, in many cases, that is true, but in many, many cases, it is not. Okay, so for one of our clients, we did a study where we helped them find the right distributors, and this was a medical device company, and the right solution for them was to appoint one distributor to focus on just the Indian armed services and their hospitals across the country. And then they took a regional approach and they wanted to go step by step, which is what we had advised them. So they signed up a distributor in Bangalore and another distributor in Delhi. And these were regional distributors. And that's what made sense for this particular medical device client. Okay. We've had other situations where we recommended for a B2B company to sign up one distributor that addressed the OEM market because their product could be built into the products of other companies, much like a tire company or a headlight company might sell their headlights into an automotive market, and so different car makers would buy their headlights. So similar to that is what we recommended. And then we found a separate distributor or partner for their value-added reseller markets, which were the smaller systems configurators and so on. And finally, we recommended a third catalog company that put their product into their catalog so it could be distributed to a large number of small customers. And that was the right approach for this particular client. In either case, we did not go with the traditional select a distributor kind of situation. Now, the other aspect to keep in mind is often when people are entering India, they'll say, well, India is so far from, Chicago or Los Angeles or New York. So why don't we ask our office in Dubai or Hong Kong or Shanghai or Singapore or sometimes even London to run the India business for us? In general, we advise American companies to not consider that as their primary option. There are some cases where that works, but in most cases, that is not the appropriate way to treat the Indian market. There's many other ways that we can segment the Indian market, and I won't dwell on that in detail in the interest of time. But one other point I also wanted to make is that as you start talking to customers in India and talking to specialists in India and talking to, reading more about it, you will find inevitably people will say that India is extremely price sensitive. And I want to delve a little bit deeper into that. India is one of the, India has bought a number of Boeing military aircraft. The C-17 transport aircraft was built right here in Southern California. They have bought the P-8I, the Poseidon, which is a modified 737 for reconnaissance purposes that the Indian Navy runs. They have bought the Dreamliner. And none of these are inexpensive purchases, whether it's the Indian military or the Indian airlines. They are buying, the best product in the world. They are value sensitive far more than they are price sensitive. So if you take a product to them that has a lot of features that were appropriate for the US or Japanese or European market, but the Indian market doesn't see a need for those features or a need for that reliability, or that thing that you added in there, which made great sense, to sell into Canada, and they don't see any value for that, then they don't want to pay the premium for it. And that's what Greg was referring to when he said, try to customize your product for the Indian market where that's appropriate. Whirlpool, the company I talked about in the beginning, is a master at doing that. Their products in India are very highly tailored and customized to the needs and habits of Indian customers. Now, India is so diverse that many Indians themselves don't realize how diverse their own country is. So people in North India will often think of all of South India as a point, rather than 4 or 5 different states. And likewise, when I lived, I was a North Indian, and my first job was in Bangalore, and everybody called me as being from Delhi, just because people in Bangalore at that time equated all of North India as a single point being New Delhi. So I'm going to show you a brief segment of a video. It's a kind of a corny little funny video that shows the differences between the various states of South India. I'll only play the first minute of this.
Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra, I am sorry, split into Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Pondicherry, Lakshadweep, Yanam, Mahe, Karika, all the union territories and the states of South India.
Entra idi recording
haudu illi ba haadona
enna pa ella ready ah
eda enikku oru chaya tharao
Language is no barrier. Look at all the Northeast here, not complaining when it's hot. You can give this place a thought. Chennai Express, 2 states, paint us in a stereotype. Let us now make something clear. We are different people here. We are south of India. This is not a single state. We're here to clear the slate. We are south of India. There is no Madrasi, we are all Padosi. Shabrimala, Guruvayur, Alukasan, Chemanur, fish fry, beef fry. First of every month is dry. Mohanlal.
Okay. Now, some of that video may have been hard to understand. Well, don't be worried. It was hard for me to understand as well, because the body language of the people, the words they're speaking, and some of the things that they're saying are specific to the languages of the states that they come from. And again, this is a demonstration of the diversity of India and the fact that you need to consider that in your marketing plans for India.
Gunjan,
Yes.
would you be able to answer a few questions right now?
Sure.
Okay, great. So we have Dan from Albuquerque who's asking, if we gave all our India business to one distributor, would the distributor get our product approved for us in India?
Okay, so great question. Now, of course, I addressed the part about using just one distributor. So that may make sense for you, Dan, but may not. And I hope we know that that's something that you can explore. Now, the other question relating to, will the distributor register the product for us? And that also can be broken down into 2 levels. One is, does it make sense for the distributor to own the registration? In some cases it does, but if you're going to have multiple distributors in India, chances are that you don't want one of them having a dominance over the others in terms of owning the national registration for your product. So often it makes sense to consider having yourself, your Western entity create a subsidiary in India to own the distribution. We've done that with a couple of our consumer clients where that has worked out very well for them. There are other options as well, but that's something that you need to delve into a little bit deeper. The second question, I think that's built into your second assumption that is built into your question is, will this distributor pay for the registration? And that's also something that I think needs to be unbundled. You need to determine, what's the kind of business that they are going to be able to produce. Many distributors in India are undercapitalized and don't have the kind of money to fund a marketing effort and a registration effort for you. So again, this is a discussion you need to have with the distributor, whether it makes sense for them to own it, whether it makes sense for them to pay for the registration, or for you to own it and you to pay for it. And these are 2 separate questions. You can parse them out in different ways. Was there another question, Supriya?
Yes, Gunjan, thank you. Rob from Irvine, it's I think more of a statement, but you could probably comment on it. Says we just cannot find a qualified distributor in India.
Yeah. So that often happens to people. Often they are, they have criteria that, for distributors that they've used in other countries, and those don't seem to match or map over very well into India. And sometimes it's just that they haven't looked hard enough, frankly. If you restrict yourself to the Google inquiries or the website inquiries coming on your website, chances are that the right distributors aren't going to be coming to you. India is a fast growing country. The good distributors are busy with the business they have already. And very often when we take on a distributor search for a client, we are not just qualifying the distributor, we are also helping the distributors to qualify the client and be sure that we are pitching the value that our client brings to this particular channel partner in India to be sure that it's going to be a fruitful and long-term relationship. The worst thing that can happen to you, in fact, is if you appoint a distributor and perchance you give them the right to own the registration, and then they don't make any sales or they make very limited sales over the period of the agreement. And in that time, you are feeling trapped. So it's a good idea to be vigorous and diligent in the search and make sure you have a number of alternatives. And unless your business is unique, you want to have a plan where over time you will have multiple distributors. Thanks very much. Okay,
Great. Thanks, Gunjan.
Let me move on to the next slide. Okay, so earlier when we did the poll, we asked, which are the most important considerations or the biggest challenges that you might face, and people, didn't really bring this one up in a significant way. And I think this is the 15 years of working with American and Western clients dealing with India. I think the biggest takeaway that I can give you in this webinar today is that you need to focus on understanding the way India is and the way Indians think, and to be able to build that trust with your Indian partner. So cross-cultural communication is the most important aspect of succeeding in India. And that's not easy for Indians too, by the way. So the picture on top that you see here is two Indian business people interacting. And you see the individual on the left has its hands together in a namaste pose, whereas the other person is sticking his hand out to shake hands. This confusion happens when Indians are interacting with Indians. So imagine when Indians are interacting with Californians or Texans or people from Toronto, how confused they might be with each other. So when you go to India, keep in mind, as I say, that they may speak English, just like your physician or just like your colleague, your Indian American colleague. But the people that you meet in India do not think American. The processes in their minds are very, very different from what you and I are used to. And this is at many levels. First of all, the accents, and there are many, many different accents across the country. Second of all, the words that they use. So an Indian might tell you that they want to prepone a meeting. Well, the word prepone doesn't exist in American English, but the Indians invented it. They may tell you to open the bonnet of your car, and you'll wonder, my car doesn't have a bonnet. What is that? Well, it's a British term that refers to the hood of the car. And there are hundreds of other words that have crept into English from various Indian languages and from inventions that have happened in India. So I highly recommend that you go to one of the most popular sections of our website, the Indian English Dictionary, where we've cataloged over 700 such words that an American might encounter in the midst of an English conversation. Going beyond that, there is also considerable variation in body language and the way people move their heads to say yes or no. We don't have time to show the little video on that. Maybe after the end of the webinar, if some of you want, I can show you a little head bob video. But the most important lesson from this slide, I think, is that when you go to India as an American, you must try to be as humble as possible. Don't assume that you know the answer. Don't assume that the American way is the better way. India has been around 5,000 years. They've been doing things differently, and they've been surviving. And many Indians are very proud of their history. So the more humble you can be, and the more of a better listener that you can be, the more success you will generally have in India. So that's an important point to keep in mind, and probably the most important thing that I'm saying in this webinar today. Are there any questions about that relate to this subject?
Sure, Gunjan. We have Frank from Connecticut who's asking, how does an American company with a structured data to decision oriented process adapt to the seemingly unstructured business environment in India?
Yeah, so when people visit India for the first time, they're inevitably overwhelmed by the apparent chaos. And the chaos is at various levels. I tell people India will attack you on all 5 senses. It's not just visual, not just auditory. So it seems pretty chaotic. And indeed, in many ways, it is chaotic. But when you visit a business partner, when you're having a discussion with them, what may seem to be unstructured at first is just a different structure than we may be used to here in the West. And India is not the only country that has this kind of situation. I live here in Southern California, where there are many Japanese automakers and electronics companies that have set up offices. And when American companies first interacted with the American Honda Motor Company, they were surprised that Honda didn't even have an org chart. They couldn't tell who reported to whom at Honda. And there were many senior executives who never seemed to even have a desk. They would just wander about the company, talking to various people, and you couldn't figure out, what their role was. But Honda is a very successful company. They've done extremely well worldwide. They're the world's largest maker of engines and a successful car maker. Uh, the Japanese structure and organize their companies in a different manner, and likewise the Indians. So you have to understand the diversity of India. You have to understand how Indians prioritize things. You have to understand what I call indirect communication. Indians are experts at that. In the US, we are trained to call a spade a spade. In India, no, if you call a spade, you are considered unsophisticated. And so think about that. That's a bigger subject that we can address in today's webinar, but it's something that's very important if you're going to succeed in your discussions in India, and if you're going to understand how your Indian partner functions.
Great, Gunjan. And along with that, he was also asking, how do I best negotiate with my Indian counterpart?
Great question. And negotiation is really the same all over the world. The difference is the characteristics of your negotiating counterpart. So you have to understand what is important to your negotiating partner, to the party on the other side. And your assumptions of what may be important may not be correct. So the success is not just in the words you say and how you respond to their emails or to their actions. It's really to get under that to the next level and understand what are their motivations, what is driving them, what is a showstopper for them, and many of these things are not stated, not stated overtly. So it's something that you may need advice from. You may need advice from a third party. You may need advice from a trusted person that you can turn to. But it's hard for somebody who's new to India to be able to do this on their own. So if there is something happening with your Indian partner, it's happening for a reason. Even though it seems random and unstructured, you got to get to the next level and understand what is motivating them to do that. So let's move on to the next slide. A lot of people were concerned. I think you said 38% were concerned about laws, rules, and regulations, and those are important. But they are not the reason to consider going to India, and they shouldn't be the reason to consider stopping a project in India. And this is a big subject, so let me just cover a few points really quickly. First of all, look at the graph on the right. The World Bank publishes every year or every other year this report called the Ease of Doing Business. In 2014, India was ranked 142nd, out of 200 countries, 190 countries, in the ease of doing business. And the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, took it upon himself and his administration to improve that. So they have risen dramatically and come up to number 77 as of last year. The Modi administration hopes, if it gets re-elected, that they will be able to take this up to the top 50 ahead of China, if that works out. Now, I promise you the growth will not be as rapid for the next 5 years as it has been in the previous 5 years, but we have seen considerable improvement. So when you incorporate a company in India, you don't have to worry about whether it's in Delhi or Mumbai or Chennai. The registration process is identical, unlike what we see in the US, where 50 states have 50 different sets of laws, and most companies want to incorporate in Delaware or perhaps Nevada if they can get away with that. Okay. If you are selling a product in India, you need approval in most cases, and there are agencies that grant that approval through their own rules and regulations. So if you're selling a food or a supplement, you will go to the Ministry of Health's Food Service and Safety Authority of India, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, FSSAI. If you're producing a pharmaceutical or a cosmetic or a drug, you will go to the CDSCO, which is also part of the Ministry of Health. We're currently helping a startup that has a radioactive product that destroys cancers very rapidly, and they want to launch in India and the US at the same time. Well, we need to get approval for them from the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. And there are a number of other agencies that are involved in regulations and approvals. Greg referred to the GST, the Goods and Services Tax, which is a uniform national sales tax that the Modi administration implemented. Previous governments had talked about it for the last 15 or 20 years, but it is now a reality, and virtually all products sold in India are now governed under the GST regime. there are import duties and other things that we'll get into if there are questions about it. But I want you to move on at this point. So this is the end of the formal webinar, but I did want to take a minute to go back to those photographs. Okay. No, we don't have a good way to have a dialogue with the audience right now. So I'm going to kind of explain each of these photos. So the Palmyra tenements, okay. Most of us here in the United States associate the word with tenements with slums and low-end housing of the kind that projects in New York City. The government built these houses for low-income people, and so the word tenement has become equivalent to the word slum or projects as we call them in Los Angeles. But if you go to the dictionary and you actually look at the word tenements, it just means multi-unit housing. Okay, the color that has been added to the American usage of the word in the last 100 years is an American phenomenon, not a global or worldwide phenomenon. So when I first saw this sign, I got out of the car to take a picture of it, and I thought, here's somebody perhaps who didn't understand English very well. Well, I was wrong. And the person who put up the sign was actually right, because the word tenement can be used in a context, in a meaning that is slightly different from what we see here in the United States. Okay. Likewise, let's look at the photograph at the bottom right. Why would somebody put a tree in the middle of the road, right? So if you become familiar with India, Greg has lived in India for 3 years, right? So people start to gain an understanding of how India functions, and it's a bureaucratic country. So you might say, hey, the road widening department perhaps did not talk to the tree trimming or tree cutting department, and they never communicated. So they widened the road and left the tree in the middle, and that's it. So that's one level of understanding of India, saying, hey, okay, now I have a reason to explain this weird kind of phenomenon. Okay. But let me take you to a deeper level of understanding. If I tell you that I took this picture in Chennai early in the day when there was not much traffic and not many people about, okay, so it looks kind of weird. But if I went there 2 hours later, what I would find is that there are cars and taxis and push carts and vendors and bicycles parked along the side of the road, and the tree that looks like it's in the middle of the road is actually on the side of the road. Nobody actually drives in that lighter gray portion. I'm not saying that putting a tree in the middle of the road is a good idea. Okay, that's not the point that I'm making. All I'm saying is that when you see India in its reality, the tree in the middle of the road doesn't look as bizarre as it might if you saw it without context. So understanding India is all about understanding that context. So let's talk about the picture on the left, the self-driven car. This is nothing to do with driverless cars. India doesn't have very many of those right now. A self-driven car in India means a car that is driven by the owner of the car. Okay. Now, what do we mean by that? So in India, historically, most people affluent enough to buy a car were also affluent enough to actually have a paid chauffeur to drive the car. And there's a whole, I could spend an hour talking about that very subject. But this sign is actually telling people that if you're the owner of the car, you can park on this side. Whereas if you're in a chauffeur-driven car, maybe the chauffeur has to park, quarter mile away, a few hundred yards away, not right next to the building. Okay, so that's the first layer of the onion. Okay, the second layer of the onion, you again need to understand that India is, people ask me about the caste system in India, and I say, don't worry about the caste system. But what you do need to understand in India compared to the United States, it is a very class-driven society. So people who are driving their own cars are generally more affluent, and they are given this privilege, whereas chauffeurs and drivers are considered part of the working class, and they are very frankly not treated with a great amount of respect in India, unlike what you might see in other countries. The class structure is very rigid in India, and it's actually getting firmer as the upper middle class is advancing in economic progress and so on. So there's many levels again to understand this picture. But let me come back to the previous slide now. And Supriya, tell us what questions the audience has.
Yes, Gunjan, we have quite a few questions, so thank you everyone. And I do want to point out that some questions are very sort of industry or person specific, and those we will respond to you individually after the webinar. Um, so Natalie is asking, is India open to adopting ISO-based standards for our industry?
Okay, great question. So, India has generally subscribed to global standards across a range of industries and initiatives. India was a founding member of the World Trade Organization, a founding member of the United Nations, and of many, many other multilateral bodies. So, the ISO is the International Standards Organization. And if you're a medical device company, you would follow the ISO 13485 in your manufacturing. And India now requires foreign companies and others, domestic companies as well, who produce medical devices to be compliant with ISO 13485. Many companies that ascribe to global standards will adhere to ISO 9001 in their routine operations, and many Indian companies are 9001 compliant. Now, I think Natalie had sent this question ahead of time. If I remember, she's in the personal care consumer business, and certainly I think India would be open to approaching standards. India already approaching standards. Yes, India is already banned the use of animal testing, or the requirement for animal testing for consumer products, unlike China, which until recently required animal testing for their products. So India is becoming much more sensitive to the needs of global companies and global standards. But any pitch being made to India has to be made in India. That's the important thing to keep in mind. That when you are trying to convince India to do something, Washington, D.C. is the wrong place to do so. This action has to happen in India. In fact, our pistachio client, who's, you saw the photograph of the Paramount pistachios on a previous slide, they wanted India to reduce the import duty on pistachios. And for a while, they had hired a couple of high profile lobbying firms on K Street in Washington.
Asking, how do I begin to do business in India? Who would be my first contact?
How do I begin doing business in India? Well, that depends on where you are. I mean, in your evolution, I tell people, first of all, that except under very unusual circumstances, India shouldn't be the first international market that you enter. And the US Commercial Service is very good about emphasizing that as well. For a company that is starting out on the journey to exports, look at Canada, Mexico, and other nearby markets first. India is all the way on the other side of the earth, and it's a little harder to get there, a little harder to do business there. So that's the first thing. Be sure that India is right for you. Now, there are some companies in the cell phone business or in the solar business or in some kind of appropriate technology where India should be their first market. So this is not something that applies to everybody, but certainly, it's good to have some export experience before you approach India. The second thing to keep in mind is to be sure that you understand which of your products will appeal to what kind of Indian customers. And the best place to start really is to attend webinars like this, read books, not just my book, but any book or any other material you can find. The US Commercial Service also puts out some good material. The CIA, believe it or not, actually has a page on India that I think is also very valuable. So read some of those materials, understand what India is all about and what makes India tick, and then you need to determine what is the best way to approach India. Do you want to set up a factory there? Do you want investment as you go to India? Do you want to find a distributor, as many of our early customers do? There are many different ways to enter India. We have companies that are selling electronically to India without any employees there, and have thousands of customers in India. So there are many possibilities. I could get more specific if I knew the nature of his business.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gunjan. And we have a couple of people who've asked the name of your book. And I just wanted to let them know that it's called Doing Business in 21st Century India, published by Hachette. And it's available on Amazon in various formats. We have a question from DK who had asked, is there any excise tax remaining in India, or has the GST replaced the excise tax?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, the goods and services tax was implemented all across India as a national sales tax. So there are various levels of GST, but if the given product has a GST applied to it, it's the same level of tax all across the country. There are a few products that are exempt from GST, and they are things like petroleum, gasoline that you get into your car, and those still have excise tax. So it's one or the other, it's never both. And virtually all the products that we are talking about on this webinar would really fall under the GST regime if they are taxed at all.
Great, thanks. And there's a follow-up question to that about, is there an advantage to making products in India rather than importing complete products from overseas?
Sure. So that's a great question. Depending on the nature of your product. So if you're a car maker, if you are the Ford Motor Company, chances are you'll want to assemble your cars in India. In fact, Ford has one of the most successful automotive operations in India. They're manufacturing cars in India for the India market. They're actually making cars in India and shipping them to South America and Mexico. And this year, they're actually making a car that will end up on US dealer lots. So it makes sense to do that. If you're Procter and Gamble and you're selling, mid-range and low-end consumer products, then it's hard to justify shipping them all the way from the United States to India. And so Procter and Gamble and Unilever and other companies have either vendors or factories of their own in India. Many people will manufacture in India to avoid the import duty, which is not very different from what happens in the US, where you see, Toyota and Honda and BMW setting up factories because they want to be closer to the market in the United States. So the same kind of logic applies to India as well. But for a small company or a medium-sized company, you first want to see whether you can build a market by shipping product from overseas into India. If that works for you, then you may want to look at the next level.
Great. Thanks, Gunjan. Do you have a few minutes to take more, or should we?
As many as, yeah, I'll stay
Okay.
on for as long as needed. And sorry for the weird interruption in the middle with the audio going out.
Yeah. So Paige is asking, are there environmental regulating agencies in India, and are they federal or more state/local?
Yeah. So things such as the regulations about the environment are often governed at the federal level. You have automotive regulations that govern the amount of emissions coming out of the exhaust pipe. You have regulations on water and the Indian equivalent of OSHA and EPA that govern the kind of effluents. There are also state regulations. The manufacturing is largely a state subject. India is a federal country, much like the United States. So the states have power over a number of crucial areas, such as manufacturing. So the states may also have rules governing environmental kind of conditions. But most of the rules, I would imagine, for what she's talking about, are federal rules.
Got it.
The federal government, by the way, in India is not called the federal government. The term that most Indians use is the central government. The legal technical term is the union government. So when you look at documentation from India, those are the two words that you will see most often: the union government in formal documents, and the media and other people refer to it as the central government.
Great. Paige is also asking, are women executives seen as equals at the business table in India?
Aha, so good question. So if you look at some industries, there are a number of very high-profile women. Banking, for example, which in the US has been dominated by men. In India, a number of the top CEOs of the largest banks in India are women. Naina Lal Kidwai from HSBC, in HSBC India, the State Bank of India had a woman CEO, and many others as well. If you look at other industries as well, women play a prominent role in leadership. India's largest biotech company was founded by and is run by Kiran Mazumdar Shah, She is India's richest self-made woman. There's also a number of women whom you will see who have obtained their position through family wealth, and that's again not very different from what you might see in the U.S. So yeah, it's women do play a prominent role in Indian government, in Indian business. In fact, the Minister of Defense in India today is a woman, presiding over the third largest army in the world. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, the equivalent of our Secretary of State in the US, is also a woman.
Great. Thank you, Gunjan. We are now actually 10 minutes over, so I think we should probably wrap up. And so we have some other questions, but they are sort of very industry and person specific, so we can get to them via email, I guess.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today, and look out for a follow-up email from Amritt regarding the webinar and regarding the questions. Thank you again, and have a nice day. Goodbye.